Welcome back to the 120th episode of Chad and Steve Have a Podcast. In the depths of 2020, this place began as a way for us to discuss the trials and tribulations of being full-time YouTubers or content creators. It has grown into a space for creative people. And in this episode, we're joined by one of the most creative and talented and smart people that we know, Mr. JJ McCullough, who joins us on the podcast for a podcast leading sixth time. So congratulations.
Wow.
You'll get a little
Wow,
dinner
what an
jacket
honor.
or something like that. He's a journalist, a YouTuber, author, political and social commentarier. And amazingly, he just gets better each time he comes on our podcast. So please help me welcome back to the podcast, JJ McCullough.
Thanks so much for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Great to see you again. It's been a while since the three of us got together. I think it was last June at VidCon.
Yeah,
it has been. It has been a while. And thankfully, there's really nothing noteworthy going on in the world right now. So I don't think we have much to talk about. So how's your hair these days, JJ?
Oh, it's fine. Yes, definitely no diplomatic kerfuffles between our two nations. At the very least.
God!
I'm sure we'll touch on a few of those things, but at the risk of those things taking over this podcast, one of the things that we did want to talk about, since we're at on the cusp of a brand new year, or we're well into a new year now, wanted to talk about YouTube and the YouTube platform, and more specifically, maybe where we see it going or arriving in 2025. As far as being a content creator on the platform, have you adjusted or in any way altered the way that the video flow traditionally works for you now with this new era of YouTube that we seem to find ourselves in?
Well, definitely, like, one thing that I feel I've been hearing a lot of people sort of say in the creator sort of community, and a sort of new piece of conventional wisdom that seems like it's really sort of consolidating, is just the idea that people are not really watching channels that they subscribe to so much as they're relying much more heavily on sort of the Discover tab and sort of YouTube recommendations and that kind of thing. And so in that sense, I feel like there's been a bit of a shift from the idea that, that you should be making videos primarily with your existing base in mind, as opposed to making videos that kind of appeal to newcomers. And that is something that I'm trying to sort of internalize a little bit, because I do think that in my own career, I have been making videos too much with an eye towards what will appeal to my existing sort of subscriber audience, as opposed to trying to sort of reach out and sort of seduce new people into consuming my particular videos. And how I kind of feel like I've seen that starting to manifest just at the level of the videos themselves is, I don't know, like the gimmicky kind of reality showification of YouTube channels, I think, is starting to become quite a pronounced sort of feature of this current era. Videos that have a very accessible sort of premise to them. A lot of them which takes the form of something that is a personal challenge or a personal adventure. And I guess in a way that kind of feels retro in some ways, the I ate everything on the menu, or, I went to visit every this in my state, or I attempted to do this for X number of hours, and that kind of thing really feels like it's coming back with a vengeance, even in sort of realms like my own, the kind of more highfalutin, pretentious, like pseudo educational content. Right? It's like, if you're going to try to sell educational content to audiences, it's not enough to just be like, hey, JJ, your beloved friend, is going to explain this or that. It has to be a sort of pitch that has some sort of gimmick to it, and a gimmick that can seduce first-time people who don't know or care who JJ is.
And within the first few seconds, probably. I mean, this is like, it feels like the TikTokification of YouTube is kind of moving forward at a lightning pace on YouTube. It really is all about grabbing those viewers, and like you were saying, who are just probably just going through their home feed. And so it's not so much about the subscribers watching JJ over and over again, even though I'm sure you're probably an outlier on YouTube in that you probably have a pretty substantial repeat customer for your videos.
Yeah, I don't know, really. Like, I mean, I'm close to 1 million subs, although my sub count has really sort of stagnated in the last year. But I don't know, like, what is reasonable to take for granted as being my base kind of floor, because these days it really feels like to hit 100K, like that's, I guess, like a reasonable assumption that I can have, but that's not like
Mhm.
a lot if you think of like having 1 million subs, and like 100K is what you do with like little effort. When you look at some other channels that have 1 million subs, and they can generally take it for granted that they get closer to like 500K per video, regardless of what the content is. And this actually sort of contradicts something that I feel like I have said in previous Chad and Steve episodes, which is that if you build up that personal sort of relationship with your audience, that they will reliably tune in to whatever you offer for them. But if YouTube doesn't really operate that way anymore, if people are sort of like less reliant on watching videos that they subscribe to and more just watching whatever kind of flows forth in the recommendations tab, then maybe you do kind of have to like sort of scale down or scale up your sort of your technique in order to win people over. You can't
Is
take
it
it for
something
granted
that,
that the relationship is enough.
do you spend a lot of time about figuring this stuff out? Or is this just part of being a YouTuber? It's like you just kind of, intuitively see what's happening and you try to adjust accordingly, because it seems like everybody every year always has the idea of what is coming next and how to best handle YouTube.
I don't know. I compared to some people, no, I don't sort of overthink these things too much, and probably to my detriment, right? I mean, and the thing too is like I'm like I'm solo. Like I make all my videos myself. I make a video every week. They're 20-minute videos. It's pretty long. It's pretty grueling. I don't have a lot of time to sort of like contemplate the big strategy. And
Yeah.
again, that's probably to my detriment. But I've just never been great at planning ahead. In anything in life, I'm just very much a like assembly line. Monday through Friday. 1 week at a time kind of guy.
When you're writing your videos, do you imagine the person watching them be someone who's familiar with you or not familiar with you?
Like just as a general principle in life and communication, I try to never take too much pre-existing knowledge for granted. So like I don't, like I'll even refer to sort of subtle things like the fact that I'm in Canada. Like I'll be sure to like explicitly shout that out if I feel it's relevant to the understanding of the video. Like, or if I'm referring to very basic things about, say, if I'm making a video about Canadian politics, I'll be sure to always mention, like if I say Pierre Poilievre, I'll always be sure to say Pierre Poilievre, who's the head of the Conservative Party, right? Because I just never want to, I want my stuff to be accessible to both like people that are very familiar with the subject and also people who are learning about the subject for the first time. And that's always a kind of delicate balance to sort of strike, where it's like you want to be authoritative without being inaccessible or intimidating, but then you also want to be an easy sort of entry point without being condescending to people that are already quite familiar with the topic. So,
do you have an avatar in your mind about what an average viewer kind of is, if that makes sense?
That's a good question. I feel like when you're doing these kind of like YouTube strategy sessions or whatever, they often tell you to kind of like envision the person who's watching your content. And I feel like I generally think it's like a younger American man, like maybe a guy in sort of his mid to late 20s or so, who's kind of like, broadly familiar with the world, but very curious and maybe a little bit self-conscious about things he doesn't know, and is thus trying to kind of like fill his sort of gaps of knowledge a bit. So I try to make stuff kind of geared towards that type of person, but I this is just my assumption of who I assume, and I guess on some level kind of like want my audience to be, rather than because I have a lot of like strong demographic data sort of pointing me in that direction.
One of the things I've noticed that you do, and this is sort of one of my, I wouldn't say predictions, but kind of trends that I see happening on YouTube it actually started kind of last year, and I think it's going to be going further into this year, is that, quote, being more authentic version of yourself. And I see you doing that on Instagram all the time. It's like, if you want to get JJ authentically, the version of JJ that he really presents to the world, go to his Instagram stories. I think that they're really fun, and you get to kind of, but I think that this is kind of across the board, we're seeing more and more of this on YouTube, is people taking the time in those longer form videos to sort of reveal a little bit more about themselves and not have it quite as polished as it has been. I think that we may be starting to get away from the whole Mr. Beast aesthetic.
Yeah, I kind of have two minds about this, because I agree with what you're saying, and it seems like there is a lot of evidence to suggest that like the less kind of Hollywood style videos seem to be resonating with people a bit more. But I just kind of also wonder a little bit about the degree to which people want content that really makes the creator kind of the star of it, and that makes the creator's life and personality and, you know, background and all that. Like, are people into that side of things? So I feel like that there's kind of like a, I don't know, like there's a sort of ideal spot between being kind of unpretentious and real, but then also not taking it for granted that people are that interested in you as an individual and your life and the details of your life. I don't know. I that's something that I'm sort of pondering a lot. Like, to what degree do people just really want you to be a kind of conduit for information or entertainment or whatever, and to what degree are people actually interested in developing these much demonized sort of parasocial relationships with their creators?
My prediction is this will be the end of the influencer era. I think that kind of started during COVID, when everybody was at home and not wanting these polished people talking about things and trying to sell them things. And I think it's become more and more long in the tooth as time has gone on. And I think we're at the time now where some of my other predictions is I think that the call to action needs to stop. The being self-aware of your content needs to stop. And what you said earlier, JJ, which is like not having that assumption that the people know you, the people are familiar with you, and the people kind of know what to expect, and leaning more in towards being a beacon for what you stand for and attracting an audience that way, as opposed to creators trying to be everything that the audience wants in order just to kind of grow numbers. And I think it's a long time coming, because I think everybody's kind of sick and tired of the influencer putting themselves in that place where it's like, now that I have 1 million subscribers, like my word means more, or like, you know, I have now I know what I need to give these people, or like and then just keep feeding that same thing, as opposed to the authenticity of growing yourself or using your platform just to kind of be yourself, and getting away from everything needing to be like micro niched, and this is all I do and this is all I am, because I just want to attract an audience based upon when I just talk about this stuff. When I talk about this stuff, oh man, that needs to be on my second channel, or that needs to.
Well, yeah, and I've sort of kind of done the opposite of what I was just saying. In 2020, that was when I was doing the daily videos, and it was sort of like this, very much this, you know, give and take sort of thing, interacting with the audience and just being that authentic version. But now, since I rarely post videos as it is anyway, I don't reveal information, you know, kind of about myself at all. And I guess kind of like JJ, if I kind of, the stuff that I do that's personal is over on Instagram. That's where I put it, because I think that YouTube for me now is just a place where I'm going to post a video when I want, and it's just going to be, here is a woodworking project, and that's all you're going to get from me. And sometimes people, I'll get comments from people they will say, you know, oh, I missed the days when you were, you know, so open and all of that. And it just doesn't, to me, it doesn't feel right to do that. But again, like I say, I see a lot of other people who seem to be going that route.
You should just open a second channel called Old Steve and then direct them there.
I
Old
miss the
Steve,
old
he's
Steve.
over here on this Old Steve channel.
But it's interesting because it is possible that we can mistake our oldest fans for our most representative fans, or that we can, you know, because just because people are nostalgic or sentimental, it doesn't necessarily mean that their analysis of what works or what is good is necessarily correct. And I think that that's an impulse that we often have to sort of fight against, because, you know, we all sort of get misty-eyed about the old days and, you know, remember how our early content felt a certain way that
Yeah.
we perhaps want to rekindle and all that. But yeah.
Well, I think no matter when we discover a YouTube channel, that's where we want it to stay, because
Yeah.
I've been doing this for 16, almost 17 years now, and it's like whenever at any point somebody joined it, that's the Steve they want to stay that way. And so it is hard for people to just, especially when they come back. I get comments from people be like, wow, one of your videos showed up in my feed and I haven't seen you in 10 years or something, and this is so much different now.
Maybe not a prediction, but a question. Will TikTok be banned?
Well, this is we're really sort of dating ourselves having this conversation right now, because it's supposed to be like imminent. The Supreme Court of the US is supposed to review the legality of the mandatory cell notice that Congress has passed. That could be overturned. It's supposed to go into effect in, I think, the day before Trump's inauguration. So we're filming this in, early January, and the TikTok ban is supposed to go into effect, I believe, on the 19th of January. So, but there's like all these last minute appeals being filed. I feel like I am someone who is inclined to err on the side of, if you've ever seen that meme, it's become quite popular with the kids these days, where like the little guy with the glasses is saying, nothing ever happens. Where it's just kind of like, in the world of politics and news and all of this, it's always safer to err on the side of the most dramatic thing not happening. And for this major social media platform that is so popular in the US to suddenly like go away overnight, that feels like the kind of thing that's too dramatic to happen. So I'd probably err on the side of assuming that there'll be some sort of last minute appeal or injunction or, ban overturning, or the law will be unconstitutional or whatever. And then, by this time next year, we'll be like, oh yeah, wasn't TikTok supposed to go away or something? Maybe I'm going to be wrong. I'm sure by the time this episode goes out, there might even have been a court ruling or something on it. But
this almost reminds me of, you were talking in a recent video about the Broligarchy kind of 2024. How it feels like TikTok is some way that way. Somehow it's going to be, these companies are too big for it to just be gone.
Yeah. The politics around it have also changed quite a bit. At one time there was this kind of, not to be too partisan about this, but like at one time there was a kind of like broad sort of bipartisan consensus that TikTok was bad. It was, a agent of the Chinese regime or whatever, and was, propagandizing the American people, blah, 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 blah. But now I'm sort of sorry to say that sort of the Trump kind of side of the political equation has realized that, a lot of their base kind of likes their misinformation and likes the kind of low quality kind of political takes that TikTok reliably serves up. And so now Trump himself, who once declared, and I remember making a video talking about this, Trump actually once declared a national emergency over the threat that TikTok posed, is now on the side of saying that the TikTok ban should be reversed and that the Supreme Court should throw out the resolution that the Congress passed. So, the fact that what was once a kind of issue that brought both political sides together is now sort of on the MAGA Republican side seen as an attack on their interests, I think also makes it.
God, I can't keep up with this. It's just so hard.
But I mean, but that also goes into the whole Broligarchs thing, right? Is that sort of tech has become much more partisan in a sense, and that these social media platforms, defending them has become a much more sort of right-coded political position as opposed to a general kind of bipartisan one.
And ultimately, YouTube benefits either way, because whether or not they close, people are shifting over to YouTube in droves anyways. They were pretty early and very aggressive about getting people onto the shorts. And now they've moved on and kind of grandfathered out even the concept of shorts, where I'm getting people's new regular traditional widescreen uploads being served up in the shorts feed now. So I'll be in shorts and I'll do the shorts. And now the latest video from some channel that I follow, their full 11-minute video in its, or vertical or horizontal kind of format is being shown in, and I'm stupidly sitting there and watching an entire video in the shorts feed because I'm too lazy to, kind of go and move away. So I don't even know if it matters if TikTok gets banned and all, because all of the users are just going to move over to wherever, is going to provide them that outlet.
Everybody's doing the short form content, so does it really matter? I think the TikTok people just like the way that it works, and it's like, and as somebody who just like sort of recently got involved in TikTok, it disturbs me the way as soon as you open that app, you're in it. You're just on the scroll. There's no like, it doesn't feel like there's like a resting spot in a way. But I also do think that like community seems to be surprisingly better on TikTok than I've discovered on Instagram, which I was not really expecting at all. So I,
in what
I
sort
guess
of way? Like,
I think in like people commenting on my videos and how they keep coming back and seeing them again, which also kind of surprises me. So I guess that algorithm is working. And I'm talking about the videos I'm making for my wood burning over on my Burning Dark Art Instagram / TikTok. And it's really interesting to compare those two. And for the most part, Instagram, I rarely get comments or much engagement on those videos at all compared to TikTok. And I started TikTok months after that Instagram too. So I don't know. I guess I had a preconceived notion about TikTok just from my limited use of it before actually being involved in posting videos there. But all that said, I don't watch TikTok because of that whole business about just the scrolling, and it's just, at least the content I get fed is crap. It's just like ads and weird AI generated stuff that it doesn't appeal to me. And it's probably because I haven't worked that algorithm enough. So it really doesn't really understand what I would like to watch.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Like, I'm just kind of like, maybe it's irrational, maybe it's against my own interests. I just feel like I just have a very strong like aesthetic bias against TikTok. And maybe some of it is sort of bound up in the politics of it as well, because I think of it as being a very political and politically like damaging platform. And so I just kind of have this sort of like built up resistance and incuriosity about it that, is probably against my own interests, but I just have decided to be righteously principled on this front.
We did have our very first I Quit video of the year coming from your prime minister.
Oh, that's true. Yes, Prime Minister Trudeau, which is actually funny because Prime Minister Trudeau, not too long ago, actually sort of dipped his toe into doing some actual long form YouTube content. He made what was sort of, because, immigration has become a very contentious issue in Canada, as it is everywhere. And then Prime Minister Trudeau made a kind of, I figure that's like 15 minutes or something, long form video about the state of immigration in Canada. And it was very much formatted in a sort of pseudo video essay style in which, the Prime Minister is like in his room and it's like well lit and he's like addressing the camera. He's like, immigration, it's a big topic. Let's talk about it. And he like goes through the stats and all this kind of thing, right? And it was an interesting sort of new frontier in communication from a politician. But then his resignation was done in a very sort of formal, press conference. I have always believed in Canada, this kind of thing. So
he should have done that in front of a couch. He should have been sitting on the floor in front of a couch. Yeah.
He should no. What he should have done is he should have turned on the camera dramatically, and then sat down and been like, oh, "Didn't want to make this video, guys.
I'm not editing this video at all." But be sure to smash that like button. Did he do a call to? He did no call to action. He didn't ask for subscribers, did he?
Unfortunately, not.
How engaged as Canadians are we in this particular news event, if that makes sense? Or is this literally just like overshadowed by whatever the next thing Trump is going to say?
Well, I mean, Justin Trudeau, I think, made the somewhat strange decision to resign on the 4th anniversary of January 6th, which I think was, by definition, a day where he was going to be fighting for headline space. I mean, Canadian politics has a tendency to happen on the absolute worst possible moments. Like, I remember the famous Quebec separation referendum happened like on the midst of the O.J. Simpson trial. Like, there's just a lot. One of the reasons why Americans, I think, are often kind of oblivious to Canadian news is because through no fault of our own, Canadian headlines tend to be very weirdly poorly timed. But, I mean, you do hit on something that I think is important, and I do think about this a lot, is just the degree to which Canadians and young Canadians just don't really know or care that much about Canadian politics. Like, they're just very checked out about it. Even young Canadians who think of themselves as caring about politics and, might watch videos about politics and political conversation and philosophy and and stuff going on in the US or in the world. But like the Canadian, like the domestic Canadian political scene is just, it's profoundly disinteresting to people. They think of it as being boring. I think a lot of the Canadian issues are kind of hard to apply a kind of like dogmatic ideological frame to, that a lot of, I think, young people are interested in. So like, I mean, it astonishes me to this day to think that I am the biggest like Canadian political commentator on YouTube. And I don't say that like in a sort of vain way, but it's just objectively, it seems to be the case that I am. Like I thought when I started my YouTube channel 10 years ago, this year is the 10-year anniversary of it, I really thought that there was going to be a lot of channels like mine, and possibly even channels like mine that like I would have conflict with, or we would make videos like responding to and dunking on each other. But like, aside from like a handful of like really quite small, and I would say mostly like, I don't want to be too proud about this, but I don't want to say they're inconsequential, but they have as much sort of smaller cultural footprint than I think my videos do. It's the only way I can just sort of come up with it is just that there aren't a lot of people like me that are interested in Canadian politics and also interested in sort of new media of this sort. And, I think that's, in the long term, that's not a great thing for the democratic future of this country.
Is it exhaustion or is it laziness?
I think there's just like an incuriosity about it. Like, I think that Canadian politics does not seem interesting to a lot of people. I think that the barrier to entry seems high. I mean, like the most common comment that I get from people when I meet them on the street in Vancouver and elsewhere is they sort of thank me for like teaching them about Canadian politics or making Canadian politics accessible. Because most people just, it seems a lot of people, young people in this country, just go through life with a very low kind of fluency in just even the basic sort of tropes of Canadian politics. And they're struggling so hard just to get on to like the base level of being able to like read the newspaper and understand what the terms and names and all that mean. So we're starting from a pretty low place. And I think that, frankly, when a lot of people lack knowledge, their instinct is to just avoid that topic because like I'm this way about a lot of things relating to science. Like I don't feel like I'm a very scientifically literate person. And so as a result, like I just kind of like tend to steer clear of that kind of stuff because it makes me feel dumb and I don't really, it's hard for me to understand it. And I think that's a pretty natural human instinct. It's probably not the best one, but
do you think a lot of Canadians just might be more interested in American politics than Canadian politics? I mean, because even here, I mean, if you're talking about Canadians not really paying much attention to any of this, I was talking to my American friends about Justin Trudeau, and most of the reaction I got was basically, "Huh, yeah, that he was that he was quitting." Everybody's like, "Okay, so what else?" It's like just not on anybody's radar.
No, it's true, and I mean, like, and I see this a lot with young people where they will have like very elaborate and detailed opinions on like, who's running in the Democrat primary for senator or something like that. And then you ask them about like a very basic fact about the Canadian political system and they're just kind of like oblivious and ignorant and can't be bothered to know, or just like are so intimidated by the prospect of knowing that they're just kind of like, they wave it away and say, "Oh, I don't really follow Canadian politics."
That's why we have you, JJ.
I guess I'm
so.
that person. I'm a Canadian. And I came across your content through this podcast. I discovered what you do when, while leading up to when you came on the podcast for the first time. And I remember when I saw it, I'm like, thank goodness someone is out there with this charm and charisma and presenting it in this amazing way. And they're focusing on Canadian politics and they're Canadian themselves. Because as a person as a Canadian in their late 40s, who's been as tuned in as I think I could be without, like, I guess I'm that person who would classify as ignorant towards the things because I haven't. Him stepping down and me unable to say any of the names of the people who might even be remote, next PMs of the country that I live in is embarrassing, because I also know that Ted Cruz during the Texas blackout got on a plane and went to Cuba. Like the fact that I know the senator of Texas and I don't know who's going to literally be the next leader of my country says a lot about me. So I'll put myself out there on the pitchfork and just be like, I'm that guy. And it's very weird that we're in that space because it doesn't feel like I'm deliberately not doing that. It feels like literally as a Canadian in Canada, the stuff that's prioritized on my social media feeds is clearly more driven towards an American audience than seemingly a Canadian audience.
Yeah, I mean it is complicated though, because like a lot of Americans, for instance, like know nothing about what's happening in their state level politics or their city level politics. Like there is a real sort of bias, I think, across the board towards national American politics at basically at like the presidential level or the presidential adjacent level. Like I think even like understanding of Congress is quite low, and senators beyond like a handful of high profile senators or representatives who are usually famous because they're kind of like assumed to have presidential ambitions or have had presidential ambitions in the past. So yeah, like people like Ted Cruz, Bernie Sanders, Marco Rubio, like just these kind of characters, like you follow them. And, like our buddy J-Reg, right? Like I tease him about this a lot, where it's like, your average Zoomer's understanding of like the political world is like, there's Trump, there's Bernie Sanders, there's like AOC, there's maybe like one or two other characters. And like, that's the entirety of politics in the entire world, basically. Is just like a few high profile national American sort of presidential adjacent characters, and
But
everything else is sort of, yeah.
Do you think that's because of social media? Because that's what you're going to talk
Yeah.
about with people around. I mean, there's just, you're not going to get into a lot of discussions about the mayor of San Francisco who just took office yesterday, or, that would be just too local. So yeah, of course, you're just going to talk about these big high profile national figures.
I think the debates at the American national level are very contentious, very polarized, very ideological. They're kind of easy to wrap your brain around in a lot of ways. And I think like that there's sort of two sides of the social media thing, is that the politicians play the social media game as well. Like a politician like AOC or like Ted Cruz or like Bernie Sanders, they're not, I would say, like a lot of them aren't that interested in governing or doing their jobs as politicians. They want to be sort of famous. They want to be sort of high profile people. They want to go on podcasts and write books and be on television shows and go viral and make memes and all this kind of stuff. And like in theory, this is in part because that helps sort of foster a presidential career, which I think, as we've learned, is kind of quickly descending into just like whose vibes as a kind of like celebrity figure do you like best, as opposed to like competence at governing, right? So it's like, it is a two-way street. And I think it's important that we not just kind of like, sort of flagellate ourselves for being bad voters or being sort of superficially minded when it comes to political engagement. But like the politicians themselves, I think, have not been conducting themselves with the kind of seriousness that, they perhaps should. So, but it's a complex sort of phenomenon, and it's I think something that's affecting politics all over the world. It affects, obviously not just Canada, but America too. And I don't really know how we deal with it, because I think it isn't just simply a matter of like telling people to care more or making like educational explainers. There's something that's just like not seductive about politics as normally practiced, and that represents a kind of like larger kind of, there's this cultural disposition that no one person can really just dramatically realign.
Has this been one of the larger reasons why Canadian content laws and rules are something which Canadians, or at least Canadian governments, seem to be very interested in?
I guess in theory. I mean, this is obviously something that I've made many videos on, and I'm going to go back to Ottawa again, presuming we don't have a change in government before then, sometime in the spring, to testify. Like, I think this is like the fourth time I'm going to be flying over there to testify. So, but I mean, like, it's the government has sort of argued that the reason why we need these restrictive laws, kind of like pushing Canadians in the direction of consuming more Canadian YouTube videos, watching more streaming content on the big platforms that are made by Canadian creators. There is kind of like an argument that this is in sort of the national self-interest and the patriotic, greater good. But then there's also an argument, and I think this is becoming a little bit more obvious to me as I'm sort of involved in these conversations more, that there is a lot of it that the government is really just trying to like boost the fortunes of Canadian creators themselves, and that the government is somewhat less interested in metrics determining whether or not the country is more sort of civic minded, as opposed to like, are more Canadian creators that maybe have the ear of the government making money than they are right now. Are more Canadians able to create a livelihood sort of on these platforms, which, as I've repeatedly argued, I think is a bit of a, solution in search of a problem, because it's not at all obvious to me that Canadians are struggling in this current unregulated climate. Perhaps you could argue, though, that they're not making, Canadian enough content, which I guess the government is trying to correct for. But that's, I think, just, again, like, that's a question of like where consumers are at, not where what the platforms are serving up.
Yeah, that's an interesting response, because it shows that it's the authenticity of the movement will actually come through. So as much as one could mistake it for like they're trying to do this, as you say, like, it smells too much of like you're just trying to like line some pockets or prop up the CBC or whatever that is, and you're kind of doing it in this sense of like, this is what's good for Canadians, but we can almost smell that out. So therefore, that's why we call foul, as opposed to just like wanting to be conspiracy theorists and assuming they're not trying to do this for the right reasons.
Yeah. Like, because like when I testify at these committees and things, and you see the other witnesses, it's all just kind of like people with their metaphorical hands out saying like, we're struggling. The big American companies are eating our lunch. Ottawa, help us. I want my radio station to be more prosperous than it is, and this sort of thing.
I mean, I guess that would apply to radio and stuff, but when you get onto YouTube, it's a worldwide audience.
Yeah. And that's why I think it's not a very persuasive argument. You're right. There's nothing to believe that like Canadians are sort of uniquely, being sort of held back by this unregulated regime. People can be enormous successes if they make content that audiences like, regardless of where they come from. And I mean, we can all think of channels that come from all sorts of random countries and have become huge global sensations.
Yeah, I feel like we've had this conversation a lot, but it just feels like old media is just begging to stay relevant. It's what it really comes across as. Like, we have a radio station, right? Come on.
Yeah, so I don't know, like maybe that'll be a theme of 2025. Are we going to see the last remnants of these dinosaurs finally swept away, and this is just the reality that everybody's going to learn to make peace with? This is the media. Like, this actually, if I can go on one other tangent, like this was an interesting sort of line that came up in the aftermath of Trump's victory, right? Trump went on all of these podcasts, blah, 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 blah. And, he was given credit for, boosting his political fortunes by going on Rogan and Theo Vaughn and all the rest of it. And one sort of line that I heard some Democrats kind of saying in the aftermath of it is that we need to sort of stop thinking of things like Joe Rogan and Theo Vaughn and the streamers and the podcasters as alternative media, right? That is the mainstream media now. So like these people, these podcasters and social media characters, that is mainstream media. And we need to kind of like get out of this paradigm where we sort of think that, that there's this kind of like legitimate old media that's being displaced by this new upstart media that has this like air of rebellion to it. It's like, no, the rebels are in control now. The revolution has succeeded. There's a new regime in town.
YouTube turns 20 years old this year. So yeah, that's hardly old media, or it's hardly new media at this point.
Yeah, precisely. But old frames die hard, I guess.
Well, I think what you do on your channel is not just politics, but I think you do a great job of blending in, cultural literacy and all of this stuff. And I think that's why you are the Canadian political commentator on YouTube.
Well, thank you. I hope I can keep it up. I do live in constant fear of being displaced by some hotshot newcomer.
Somebody's coming for you, JJ.
Yeah, someone is. You gotta always have that anxiety. Yeah.
Stay hot on that thumbnail game. That's all you need. Anyway, hey, it was great talking to you again. Thanks for your thoughts on all of this. Everybody, we're trying to switch this to mostly a YouTube formatted podcast. I mean, we're going to still have it on the other platforms, but we really, really think that YouTube is where podcasts are. So as you're watching this or listening to this on YouTube, please leave us a comment and tell us what you think about the show. And we will be back with more very soon. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.